Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. I heard it through the bathroom door, her voice sharp and amused, pitched just loud enough to be cruel. She was on speaker with her friends, pacing the bedroom, phone glowing in her hand. She said he's not getting anything tonight, like it was a joke everyone already understood. Laughter spilled out, careless and rehearsed. I stood there with my hands wet, staring at my reflection, and felt something click into place. Not anger, not shock, certainty. My name is Ethan Cole, 39, cybersecurity architect. I make a living setting boundaries for systems that don't know how to protect themselves. Rules, access levels, permanent blocks. Until that moment, I thought I was married to someone who understood the concept. Lena worked in social media marketing. Attention was her oxygen. Metrics, reactions, comments, screenshots. Our evenings had slowly turned into background noise, the TV looping Hulu while she scrolled and smiled at a world that never slept. I used to think that was just the job. I was wrong. Earlier that night, she'd come home late from one of her Starbucks meetups, iced cup in hand, lipstick untouched, eyes already elsewhere. She didn't notice the way I watched. Or maybe she did and liked it. Provocation was her language. The man she was seeing wasn't a mystery. It was Mark Rivera, a self-styled content producer who confused volume for value. Months earlier, I'd shut him down during a joint project review. Documented violations, harassment patterns, unsafe data practices. I'd removed him quietly, professionally. He hated me for it. Apparently, that made him irresistible to her. She finished the call and tossed the phone onto the bed, satisfied. When she walked past me, she didn't look up. Power move. Denial as performance. She went to sleep believing she'd set the terms. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask questions I already had answers to. I sat in the dark living room, the TV still murmuring to no one, and opened my laptop. Shared accounts, cloud storage, subscription access. All the places people forget to lock because they assume loyalty is permanent. By midnight, everything that mattered was already gone. At 2 in the morning, I carried one bag to my Chevy Silverado. I didn't close the front door. I left it wide open, not as a message, but as a condition. Some things don't need explanation. When I pulled away, my phone was already off. She wouldn't understand the silence yet, but she would. I didn't go far that first night. Distance creates drama, and drama was what she fed on. I parked behind a closed strip mall, engine off, watching the glow of my phone fade as it powered down for good. Silence settled in fast, heavier than I expected. Not empty. Controlled. By morning, she would notice the gaps. Not the door. Not yet. She'd notice the Amazon password first, the autofill failing like a forgotten anniversary. Then the shared calendar. Then the streaming profiles collapsing into one anonymous login that wasn't hers anymore. I'd seen this pattern in breached systems 100 times. Confusion before panic. Noise before understanding. I drove as the sky lightened, keeping to side roads, thinking through what I already knew. The affair hadn't been impulsive. Lena curated everything. The angles, the timing, the audience. She wanted witnesses, not intimacy. Mark fit because he was loud, predictable, and desperate to be seen winning something. Especially me. Our marriage had turned into a content strategy months earlier. Arguments staged, reconciliations documented, shopping trips to Target used as proof of normalcy after every fight. She called it processing. I called it masking. The difference mattered. I stopped at a gas station and washed my face in a sink that smelled like disinfectant and burned coffee. In the mirror, I looked exactly the same. That felt important. People expect disappearance to look like damage. I was intact. By noon, the messages would start. Not to my phone. To the void where my presence used to be. Comments left unanswered. Calls routed nowhere. She would post anyway, smiling through it, testing if the internet could fill the gap I'd left behind. It wouldn't. It never does. But she'd try. I didn't block her. Blocking creates a reaction. I removed myself instead. Access revoked without alert. The cleanest kind of cut. I checked into a cheap roadside motel under my middle name and paid cash. The clerk didn't look up. Perfect. I slept for 4 hours without dreaming. When I woke up, the first thing I did was open my laptop. I wasn't tracking her messages. I was tracking patterns. Mark's online behavior shifted the way insecure men always do when they think they've won. Louder posts, more bait, sloppier claims. He was already bragging in coded ways, framing conquest as collaboration. He didn't realize I wasn't watching him. I was watching the edges, the accounts he touched, the shortcuts he took. People like him always leave fingerprints. And Lena had just handed me a reason to care. By the time the sun went down, the silence had done its work. She still thought she was in control. She wasn't even close. By the second night, the noise finally started to leak through the silence. Not to my phone, to the system she assumed would always carry me back. Shared cloud folders lighting up with error messages. A payment failure notification from a joint account she thought was still joint. The quiet unraveling always begins with logistics. I spent that evening in the motel room with the lights off, laptop open, watching behavior instead of messages. Lena didn't reach out directly at first. She posted. That was her reflex. A photo from earlier, recycled and timed. Her smile angled just enough to suggest victory. The caption vague. The comments loud. Validation on demand. She needed an audience to confirm she'd won something. Mark amplified it within minutes. He always did. The man couldn't resist being seen adjacent to drama. His online presence spiked the way insecure systems spike before a crash. More uploads. Less filtering. He didn't know it yet, but he'd already crossed into the zone where I used to flag people quietly and remove them without explanation. I ordered takeout and ate it cold, not because I wasn't hungry, but because hunger kept me sharp. Between bites, I rerouted the last shared access point she still had. A forgotten subscription tied to an old email. The kind of oversight people rely on when they think trust is permanent. I corrected it. Around midnight, she went shopping online. I knew because the attempts showed up as failures. Save carts abandoned. One of those late-night Amazon spirals she used to call self-care. That was when panic started replacing performance. Buying is control for people who don't actually have any. I imagined her pacing the living room. Hulu still playing to no one. Refreshing apps, wondering why nothing was responding the way it used to. She'd start rehearsing explanations soon. For her friends. For Mark. For herself. The story would shift from triumph to confusion without ever touching accountability. I didn't feel satisfaction. Satisfaction is noisy. I felt alignment. The way things feel when a system finally behaves the way it's supposed to after a breach is contained. Before sleeping, I opened a clean document and wrote 3 words. Not a plan. A reminder. Do not respond. Morning came quietly. I left before checkout, dropped the key without making eye contact, and drove east until the city thinned into nothing. Somewhere along the road, I realized something important. She hadn't been trying to hurt me. She'd been trying to provoke me. And by disappearing instead of reacting, I'd taken away the only thing she actually wanted. The stage. She just didn't know it yet. By the 3rd day, the silence stopped being empty and started becoming loud to everyone except me. I felt it in the way systems reacted when a primary user vanished without warning. Latency. Errors. Assumptions breaking down. Lena had built her life on constant feedback, and now every loop she depended on was failing. I stopped for breakfast just after sunrise, sliding into a booth at a Waffle House off the interstate. The waitress didn't ask questions. She never does. Coffee appeared, then eggs, then quiet. Men like me don't come there to be seen. We come to disappear without raising suspicion. I watched the window, not the phone, and let the day organize itself. Somewhere back home, she would have found the door. Wide open. Not broken. Not forced. Just open, like I'd stepped out for air and never come back. That detail would bother her more than anything else. No drama. No slammed exit. No explanation to perform for her friends over Starbucks cups and knowing smiles. Just absence. Her posts changed tone that morning. Less confident. Still polished, but the edges were shaking. She framed it as independence. Growth. Reinvention. The kind of language people use when they need to convince themselves first. Mark stayed close in the comments, louder than necessary, staking territory like noise could replace presence. He didn't understand the rules of quiet spaces. That was why I'd never respected him. I didn't respond. I didn't check her messages. I didn't even open the apps she expected me to haunt. Instead, I reviewed the last shared financial threads, making sure every tie was cleanly severed. No loose ends. No reasons to reach out later under the excuse of logistics. I'd learned long ago that unfinished access invites manipulation. By afternoon, the shopping started again. I could see the attempts without seeing the purchases. Target carts filled and emptied. Comfort spending without confirmation. She'd always said retail therapy helped her think. In reality, it just delayed the moment she had to sit with consequences. That night, I parked the truck near a rest stop and slept with the seat reclined, jacket folded under my head. I woke once, briefly, to the sound of a passing semi, then drifted back into the kind of rest you only get when you've made a final decision. The next morning, I realized something else. She wasn't angry yet. Anger would come later, when she realized there would be no confrontation, no closure scene, no chance to turn my reaction into content. And when that realization hit, the silence would stop being confusing. It would become unbearable. The anger arrived on the fourth day, right on schedule. Not directed at me, because she still didn't know where to aim it. Anger needs a target. Silence denies it one. I could see the shift without looking directly. The rhythm of her online presence broke. Posts came faster, then stopped abruptly. Stories went up and disappeared minutes later. She was testing reactions, deleting anything that didn't land the way she wanted. Control slipping always shows up as overcorrection. Mark started compensating for her. Louder again, more visible. He framed their connection as momentum, as if naming it could make it real. The man mistook amplification for security. He'd always been that way in professional spaces too, filling rooms because he couldn't hold them. I didn't intervene. Systems like him fail best when left to run. That afternoon, I settled into a long-term rental on the edge of a small town no one I knew would ever search. I unpacked exactly half of what I owned and left the rest in the truck. Permanence wasn't the goal. Stability was. The first night there, I let Hulu play in the background while I worked. Not because I was watching, but because silence doesn't need to be absolute to be effective. Familiar noise without attachment. A controlled environment. I slept better than I had in months. Back home, she finally tried logistics. Not messages. Not apologies. Logistics are the last refuge when emotion fails. A delivery notification from Amazon bounced back, address unresolved. That would frustrate her more than any argument. Problems she couldn't solve by talking. I imagined her standing in the kitchen, phone in hand, refreshing tracking updates, realizing even the small conveniences were no longer cooperating. She'd start blaming Mark soon. He would promise reassurance he couldn't provide. Men like him always do. Big words. No infrastructure. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. The difference matters. Triumph still looks back. Being finished means you don't need to. That night, I took a walk after sunset, hands in my pockets, listening to the sound of nothing pressing in on me. No notifications. No shared calendars. No expectation of response. The kind of quiet that used to scare me when I was younger. Now it felt earned. Before bed, I checked one thing. Not her. Not him. My own accounts. Clean. Secure. Untouched. The perimeter held. Somewhere, she was rehearsing a confrontation that would never happen. Practicing lines. Imagining my reaction. Planning the story she'd tell once she got it. She still believed silence was temporary. That was the mistake. It wasn't silence anymore. It was the new baseline. The fifth morning brought escalation, the kind that only happens when someone realizes the rules have changed and no one told them how. I could feel it without seeing it. Patterns don't lie. Lena stopped performing confidence and started manufacturing urgency. She finally tried to reach beyond the digital. Friends. Mutuals. People she'd kept in reserve for moments like this. The ones who'd sat with her at Starbucks tables, nodding along while she framed our marriage as something she was outgrowing. Now she needed them as witnesses, messengers, pressure points. None of them had my number anymore. That was intentional. Mark, predictably, overplayed his role. He started talking publicly about loyalty and betrayal, vague enough to avoid specifics, loud enough to draw attention. He needed to anchor himself to a conflict to feel relevant. Without my participation, he was shouting into a vacuum. The vacuum doesn't answer back. I spent that day setting up a new routine. Morning work. Afternoon walks. Evenings quiet. I cooked simple food and ate it slowly. Control isn't dramatic. It's repetitive. Reliable. The kind of thing people like Lena mistake for boredom because it doesn't beg to be seen. In the late afternoon, I drove into town and picked up a few things I needed. No browsing. No wandering. In and out. Efficiency clears the mind. On the way back, I noticed my hands were steady on the wheel. That was new. I hadn't realized how much tension I'd been carrying until it was gone. That night, I let Hulu run again while I reviewed legal documents I'd already prepared weeks earlier, back when I first noticed the shift in her behavior. I hadn't known the details then. I'd just known something was moving out of alignment. Good systems are designed before failure, not after. I'd signed nothing yet. There was no urgency. Silence buys time, and time clarifies intent. Back in the city, she crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She went to the door and found it exactly as I'd left it. Open. No note. No explanation. No trail to follow. That's when panic stopped being theoretical. The open door wasn't abandonment in her mind. It was exposure. Anyone could see inside now. The neighbors. The story. The truth she hadn't curated yet. She'd wanted a reaction. She'd staged humiliation as leverage. What she got instead was a permanent absence in a house that suddenly felt too loud without an audience. I didn't celebrate that moment. I didn't mark it at all. I was already asleep by then, breathing evenly, somewhere she couldn't reach. The provocation phase was over. What came next would be regret. And regret is much harder to perform. Regret doesn't arrive quietly. It stumbles in, knocking over furniture, desperate to be acknowledged. By the 6th day, Lena stopped pretending she was fine and started trying to recover ground she didn't understand she'd already lost. She didn't come looking for me directly. That would have required humility. Instead, she tried to reconstruct the narrative around my absence. Posts shifted from empowerment to concern, carefully worded to invite speculation without admitting fault. Friends filled in the blanks for her, the way they always do when someone needs to be protected from consequences. She leaned into it, letting others frame her as confused instead of exposed. Mark began to fade from view. That part didn't surprise me. Men like him thrive on momentum, not aftermath. When the attention shifted away from triumph and toward uncertainty, he lost interest. I'd seen the same pattern when projects turned difficult. Noise disappears when there's real work to do. I spent that morning working from a small diner table, the kind of place where no one asks what you're building as long as you tip well. Later, I took the truck out and drove until hunger reminded me I still had a body to maintain. I stopped at a Waffle House just off the highway, ordered simply, and watched families come and go without thinking about being seen. There's a peace in places that don't care who you are. Back home, she made her first real mistake. Not emotional. Practical. She tried to regain access she no longer had the right to. A shared service, something tied to routine rather than intimacy. Amazon again. The attempt failed, but the effort told me everything. She wasn't looking to talk. She was looking to restore convenience. That's when I knew she still didn't understand what had happened. This wasn't punishment. It wasn't a lesson. It wasn't a negotiation tactic. I hadn't removed access to make a point. I'd removed myself because the system was compromised beyond repair. That afternoon, I finalized paperwork I deliberately left untouched. Not rushed. Not angry. Precise. The kind of documents people skim because they assume they'll never be needed. I signed where I needed to, scanned copies, and filed them away without ceremony. Quiet work has a way of compounding. That night, I let Hulu run again while I cooked, not watching, just letting voices exist without meaning. I thought briefly about how she'd once complained about the silence in our house, how she'd filled it with content and conflict to feel alive. Now she had all the noise she wanted, and none of the control. Somewhere, she was realizing that my disappearance wasn't temporary, and that no amount of explanation could bring me back into a story I'd already exited. The door was still open, but I was gone. The 7th day was quieter on her end, which told me more than the noise ever had. When attention seekers go silent, it's not peace. It's recalibration. She was trying to understand what stories she could still tell without me in it. I didn't check her feeds anymore. I didn't need to. Absence sharpens intuition. I could feel the shift in the way the city stopped pulling at me, the way my thoughts stayed linear instead of looping. Control had returned, not over her, but over myself. That was the part she'd never anticipated. That morning, I woke early and drove out before the town stirred. The truck moved easily on empty roads, no destination planned, just motion. I stopped when hunger insisted and sat down for breakfast without thinking about it. Another Waffle House, another anonymous booth. The waitress poured coffee and moved on. No curiosity, no commentary, just function. I realized how rare that had become in my life. Back home, she made one last attempt to restore normalcy by force. Not communication, presentation. A carefully staged outing with friends, smiles angled just right, Starbucks cups lined up like props. The message was clear even without words. She was fine. She was supported. She was moving forward. The performance was almost convincing. Almost. Mark didn't appear this time. That absence spoke louder than any caption. He'd already moved on to the next source of validation. Men like him don't stay for consequences. They disappear when the spotlight dims. I wondered briefly if that realization had landed yet for her, or if she was still telling herself it was temporary. I spent the afternoon finishing what I'd started days ago. Not revenge. Closure. Accounts closed. Subscriptions terminated. Digital fingerprints wiped clean. The kind of work no one sees because it doesn't announce itself. Systems restored to default with one less user. That evening, I let the place grow quiet on purpose. No Hulu. No background noise. Just the sound of my own breathing and the hum of a refrigerator that wasn't shared. Silence stops being threatening when you stop fighting it. Somewhere around midnight, I thought about the moment she'd said I wasn't getting anything that night. The way she'd said it for an audience. Power borrowed from witnesses. She'd been wrong about the terms. I hadn't lost access. I'd revoked it. There was no dramatic ending waiting for her. No confrontation to frame. No explanation to dissect with friends over late-night shopping runs to Target. Just an open door, a missing presence, and a future that no longer included me as a reference point. The realization would keep her awake longer than anger ever could, and I would never know the exact moment it hit. That was the final boundary. By the 8th day, the story had collapsed in on itself. There was nothing left for her to reframe without admitting what she'd actually lost. Silence had done what confrontation never could. It stripped away the audience and left her alone with facts. I didn't hear from her. Not directly. I heard through absence. The kind that settles when someone finally understands there's no lever left to pull. No message to send that would land. No apology that would reopen a door that was never closed, just left behind. I spent that morning finishing the last administrative threads. Not revenge, not cleanup. Transition. A quiet handoff from one life to another. Digital addresses changed. Forwarding ended. My name detached from places it no longer belonged. The work felt familiar, almost comforting. This was what I did best. Identify the breach. Isolate it. Move forward without contamination. In the afternoon, I drove into town for supplies and passed a Target on the edge of the parking lot. The same one she used to drift through after arguments, filling a cart to soothe whatever words hadn't landed. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. The urge to fill space with things was gone. That surprised me. Back home, I let Hulu play for a while as I packed the last of what I wanted to keep. Not everything deserves to be carried forward. Some objects only make sense in a version of life that no longer exists. I left them behind without ceremony. That evening, the legal notifications arrived exactly as expected. No drama. No accusations. Just confirmation that the separation was now real in ways that couldn't be argued with. I read them once, acknowledged receipt, and closed the file. Quiet endings don't need commentary. Somewhere, she would be discovering what it means to explain an absence that refuses to explain itself. Friends would ask questions she couldn't answer without revealing too much. Mark would be long gone. His interest spent the moment accountability entered the room. The house would feel different at night. Every sound amplified by the space I used to occupy, without performing. I didn't feel vindicated. Vindication still centers the other person. I felt steady, anchored, the kind of calm that comes when you stop waiting for someone else to understand your boundaries. That night, I slept without interruption. No dreams, no rehearsals, just rest. The next morning would be mine alone. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like more than enough. The 9th morning felt different. Not lighter, clearer, like waking up in a place where nothing is expected of you except awareness. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the town come online without me needing to participate. No messages, no updates, no echoes from a life that had finally powered down. I took the truck out just after sunrise, driving without urgency. The road didn't feel like an escape route anymore. It felt like mine. I stopped for breakfast out of habit more than hunger, another Waffle House, another booth where no one knew my name or needed it. The food tasted better than it should have. Simple things often do when you stop negotiating for peace. By mid-morning, the last confirmations came through. Accounts closed. Addresses updated. Ties severed cleanly enough that there would be no reason to cross paths again unless one of us chose to. I knew she wouldn't. Choice requires clarity, and clarity had never been her strength. Reaction had been. I didn't imagine her regret anymore. I didn't picture the house, or the open door, or the moment she finally understood there would be no explanation waiting for her. That chapter had closed without ceremony. Quiet endings don't announce themselves. They just stop responding. In the afternoon, I let Hulu run one last time while I packed the remainder of what I'd decided to keep. Not as background noise, but as a marker. A reminder of how much of my life had been lived with something playing behind it, filling space that should have been still. I turned it off and left it that way. I thought briefly about the sentence that started everything. The one she'd said for an audience, believing deprivation was power. She'd never considered the possibility that someone might remove themselves entirely rather than negotiate access. People like her confuse attention with leverage. They mistake reaction for relevance. What she never understood was that the opposite of noise isn't silence. It's independence. That evening, I walked outside as the sun dropped low, hands in my pockets, breathing evenly. No one was waiting for me to perform. No one was watching for a response. The quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt complete. Some men fight back loud. They demand explanations. They argue. They leave messages that can be replayed and reframed. I didn't do any of that. I just left the door open, walked out, and never came back. And that, in the end, was the only statement that mattered. Been through it. When they crossed a line, and you made sure they felt it.